door and I said, "Me sihorite Kiria alas pasato zamisa sto quinto." I'm so sorry, sir, but the lady next door told me that this is your car, and I said, "I'm so clumsy." He says, "Well, wait a minute. I don't speak Greek." I said, "Oh, you speak English?" "I speak English," I said. "I'm so sorry. I was clumsy and I wasn't paying attention to where I was going, and I broke the mirror off your car, and the lady next door told me that it was your car, and I want to say I'm sorry and I want to pay for it." He's like, "Oh, you're so clumsy. What's wrong with you? You couldn't see how close you were." I said, I'm so sorry. I was just not paying attention. It's all my fault. I want to pay for it." In the meantime, well, I said to him, I said, "Your English, you have an accent. Can you tell me where you're from?" And he told me from this Middle East country. And I said, "I'm from the United States." I said, "Oh, I wish our countries could be friends again. Maybe someday." And he's just like, "Oh." And I see his little daughter. She looked to be about 4 years old. She's playing on the floor of the living room. And I said to him, "May I have a glass of water?" Knowing that culturally he had to give it to me.
Yeah.
And he says, "Wait right here." So I walked into the house and I said to his daughter, I got down on my knee and I said, "Shu ismik?" And she tells me her name. And I said, "How old are you?" And she says she's 4. And he comes in, he's holding the water. And he says, "What exactly?" Seaballer's third question says, "You've spoken at length about MK Ultra and other similar CIA experiments. Most of the attention has been on the sheer horror of these experiments. However, what I haven't heard spoken about as much is the fact that they were domestic operations conducted against U.S. citizens in violation of the CIA's own charter. Can you discuss this?" You've just told the story. That's exactly what happened. Not only did
eat any more sausage. He can't hold any sausage.
And then Clinton invites him to play chess. The sausage is going to make him drowsy. And when he gets drowsy, he gets chatty to keep himself awake. And then we'll give Clinton a list of sensitive questions to ask so we can learn some stuff that we otherwise haven't learned.
in independence, then what do you have?
Yeah. Now, there's another side to what you're saying, though, about the journalists, though, that gets really weird. And a mutual friend of ours, Joby Warwick, has talked about this openly.
Joby's like the guiding light on this issue.
Yeah.
And he's very diplomatic.
One of the most diplomatic people I've ever met in my life. So Joby's been the national security reporter forever at the Washington Post. He's got 2 Pulitzers.
Yep.
And
he's an incredible author. Like his
Unreal.
books just rocket straight to number 1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. And they're incredibly researched.
They're so well done. But love the guy. And the very first time I ever talked with him on episode 134, he was going through it and then talked about it with me off camera. He said, there's a really tough thing. He's like, I've got sources in intelligence that I'm really good friends with and stuff. And that's like, then are they telling you the truth or are they using the friendship? But then also he goes, you'll write a story. And as a journalist, you have to go to the people involved with the story and offer a chance to comment before it gets published. And he'll get a call from CIA with his editor in the room right there, or NSA or whoever, and say, if you publish this, X number of people will die.
Yeah, they always say that.
Right. And he said, we legit.
They didn't care.
So where does the Brits and Blair, and see this war was Dick Cheney and Tony Blair's war, right? And
Tony Blair was a lapdog for George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. He was such a weak little yes man that he would do anything Bush and Cheney told him to do at the cost of his own legacy.
Why would he do that, though? You being someone in the CIA, looking at all of this, what was in their interest?
You know, I think at the end of the day, Tony Blair was a neoliberal imperialist. That's really what it came down to. Yeah, he was a member of the Labour Party. That didn't really matter in the end. He was an imperialist. That's what was more important. And he'll always be seen as a tool of the Americans.
Do you think the British, the Americans, and maybe other countries took advantage of Iraq and basically شنو استعمار colonized Iraq and took a lot of its resources.
Oh, actually, no.
No.
I think that was the plan. I think that's what the Bush administration wanted to do. Yes, take the oil. But once Saddam was overthrown, see, they really believed that this Sunni general that we had not yet met was going to just come out of the shadows and say, I am now the president of Iraq. But they were idiots. I'll tell you another story. And this is why I'm confident that I'm right. The night before the invasion, George Tenet is the CIA director, and he asks me to take notes, Mexico or whatever. And you are dual citizenship is what I mean. And you're going to go to, let's say, and I'm making this up, this is not a real scenario, but you go to North Korea to look at, opening a factory there. We're going to want to recruit you so that you can come back and tell us, this is who I met, this is what he was like, this is what he said, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. That's going to be, valuable in the greater scheme of things. But in terms of people being recruited and then going into government, I never encountered one in my entire career. A bigger question, though, is foreign nationals that we recruit that then later go into their government. Yes, that happens frequently, to the point where sometimes they find themselves becoming prime minister or president of that country. I'm going to leave that there.
I stand up at the foot of his bed,
I put my hands on my hips and I'm looking at him.
and he's like tied down.
And he opens just one eye. Of course, he only had one eye.
Right? He opens his eye, and he doesn't look at me.
Yeah, he looks at SpongeBob.
And his pulse goes from 120 to 220, like in a second. And the machine starts going beep, 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 beep. And then you hear,
Hold blue, code blue.
and these people rush in. He saw SpongeBob, he knew it was up. He was
Like, oh my God, the Americans have me.
and they're like, clear, right? And then they give him Demerol.
And he's out. Out again.
And then I sat back down, and I'm waiting, and waiting, and waiting. And like 6 hours later, he starts to stir again. So he opens his eyes, and now he's just
Looking at me. He's tied down. He's just looking at me, staring at me. And then he goes like this.
and motions for me to come over. So I go next to him, and I moved his oxygen mask off of his mouth, and I said, Shuismak, what is your name? And he shakes his head. So I said again, Shuismak. And then he says to me in English, I will not speak to you.
You're just going to appoint another grand ayatollah, another supreme leader. Am I missing something? As an analyst of the West and of Western politics, what can you tell us about what the American and Israeli goal might have been in the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei?
Well, first let me tell you a bit about him so that your viewers can know him a bit better, because he's so widely demonized. Before the revolution, he came from a very poor family. His father was a high-ranking religious scholar. He went to jail 6 times, I think, or at least he went to jail multiple times. I think it was 6 times, but I have to check on that. And he was tortured. He was taken to the worst prison of all, that was in central Tehran, for the special prisoners.
During the Vietnam War, we had a similar situation in the United States where the government was so paranoid about anti-war activists threatening the government that the FBI infiltrated all the anti-war groups, and they got...
Among those Al-Qaeda fighters were 5 or 6 who were like serious bad dudes. One of them was a Libyan who was Osama bin Laden's mechanic.
He had stepped on a landmine
in Afghanistan, and he had blown his right leg off.
So he had a prosthetic leg. Well, this guy was nothing but trouble. We had caught so many guys that night that when we brought them to the safe house for interrogation, we had to bring them in a paddy wagon in groups of 10. So there was one point where we brought this guy and 9 others, and we had 10 that were getting ready to leave to go back to the jail. And this guy, he's sitting on the floor. We made all of them sit with their legs crossed so they couldn't run away.
And he starts chanting,
Death to America, death to America.
And he started getting these other prisoners riled up, and they're all chanting. So I said, hey, we got a situation going on down there.
I left the interrogation room. I went down to the first floor.
And I told this guy, shut the fuck up.
And he looked at me like smiling, smirking, "Death to America, death to America." So I reached down under his arm and I yanked him up as hard as I could. I yanked him up so hard
That his
Leg popped off.
and everybody stopped.
and looked at the leg. Now, it was still chained to the other leg, but I got right in his face and I said, "If you don't shut the
Fuck up, I'm gonna take that leg and I'm gonna beat you to death with it.
And he's like, I'm sorry, sir." The next day, we had him and 2 other prisoners at the airport. We're going to put him on a C-12 transport plane and send him to Guantanamo. But we had to strip them naked to put a diaper on them and then an orange jumpsuit.
And he's freaking out because we're stripping him naked.
And he says to me, "Sir, are you going to stick your finger up my ass?" I said, "Of course I'm not gonna stick my finger up your ass." He is, though.
And I pointed at the Marine, and the Marine just
Throws him down on the ground. The guy shouting, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." He actually had a shank up in there.
I read about that in my first book.
A shank up his ass.
I was hoping maybe you'd be free. Maybe we'll grab some sushi afterwards. He said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So we go to the show. He thoroughly enjoyed it. And we go for sushi afterwards. And then we go out again. And he says, "Why don't you come over to my place some night and I'll make dinner?" I said, "Great." So I go over to his place. He made a lovely dinner. And then I thought, well, I have to invite him to my place. So I told my wife, "You're going to have to, get out." So she left. I made dinner. I removed all the pictures of us together. And we had just gotten married. So we had, our wedding picture up and everything. At the dinner.
SaveWestBankChristians.com. I spent Christmas in the West Bank. I spent a lot of time in the West Bank. We work in Gaza. We work with the Christian community and the orphan community in Gaza. Very close to the, every morning, the first thing I do, and every night, first thing I do before I go to bed is I check in on the people that work with me in the West Bank, and they're scared. Increased settler violence right under our nose, the specific targeting of Teba, a Christian village. They just approved the new settlement Shtema, where they're going to drop 11,000 Christian homes, which will effectively end Christians in Bethlehem and the Shepherd's Field. And we have an ambassador who was a pastor, and he's silent on these abuses.
Yeah. He's as much...
Well, the TV's on, so hello.
Pretty impressive.
Hello, Langley.
Yeah.
How are you?
So what that told me, those are very cool. And there were a dozen more things that were part of Vault 7. But what it also told me is that the CIA is running parallel operations with NSA. Why is the CIA developing this stuff? This is NSA and DARPA that should be doing it. And NSA and DARPA are doing it.
What's
but the CIA
line
is
there,
also
John?
doing it.
How do you, what? Because
on the one hand, they have so much money that they can't spend it all. So they just make their own NSA, make their own DARPA. I have a buddy, I sat next to him for the first 3.5 years of my career. He's now the deputy director of the CIA for innovation. What's that? He was always a computer nerd.
Yeah.
And I remember he got an award like 1991 because he came up with a program to make a very crude family tree. Like computers were new to us at the time. When I first started, I had this big box that had a green screen. It was about that big called the Delta Data. And I had an IBM Selectric 3 typewriter next to me because half of what we did was on the typewriter still. So he came up with this crude family tree so we could do the Saudi royal family, the Kuwaiti royal family, Bahraini royal family, just so it's, clear when you're doing your analysis. And they were like, "Wow, you did that on this new computer? That's amazing. Here's $500 and an exceptional performance award." Now he's the deputy director of the CIA for innovation, which tells me that he's in charge of all this crazy shit that we're reading about.
Have to go into a conference room and basically play like blind, monkeys throwing darts at the board to see if this is one of those where they're lying or
That's
not.
absolutely true. Yes. And if it's really, really sensitive, you'll get a call from the National Security Advisor above the CIA director.
Shouldn't that set off a lot of alarm bells, though?
Definitely.
What is the line there? Like, let's say there is one, and for real, 150 people, whoever they are going to die from it.
Yeah.
But
there's no easy answer. I will say, though, that they throw that whole blood on your hands argument at people all the time. Tom Drake tells this fantastic story. Tom Drake, the NSA whistleblower. Tom Tom is the one who first told us that NSA was spying on Americans after 9/11. They were just waiting for 9/11 to happen so that they could spy on Americans, which is what they did, and they continued to do 25 years later. So Tom was charged with 9 felonies, including 7 counts of espionage and 2 counts of theft of government property, which was the information. He walked out of the building with the information in his head, and they charged him with theft.
Thought crime.
Yeah. So to make a long story short, the entire case fell apart and all of the charges were thrown out. But he went to a proffer meeting at the Justice Department where they say, here's the information we have against you, and here's the sentence we're going to ask for when we convict you. Unless you want to confess, tell us some answers to questions we may have, and then we can talk about a slightly lighter sentence. So he was looking at, it was like 55 years. I think it was 55 years. It was a long time. And they said, you have the blood of dozens of American soldiers on your hands. And to his credit, he says, name